3 years before my wife Eleanor passed away, she made me promise her something in the quiet of our bedroom. She took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and looked at me with an intensity that I had not seen in years. She made me swear that I would follow her instructions to the letter, no matter how strange they seemed. At the time, I thought it was just the rambling of a woman who knew her time was short. Today, standing at her funeral, I finally understood that her final words were not a goodbye. They were a battle plan. The church was cold, filled with the heavy scent of lilies that felt suffocating. I stood in my old black suit, feeling like a stranger in my own life. Friends and family came to me offering their condolences with sad eyes and empty words. They would pat my shoulder and say how much they would miss her, but their eyes would quickly drift away. I just nodded, my grief too deep and too real for these hollow rituals. I was a mountain eroded from the inside, standing tall but completely hollow. My world had lost its sun, its moon, and all its stars. I watched my son Marcus and his wife Tiffany. They stood near the front, performing their roles perfectly. Tiffany would dab a dry eye with a tissue, while Marcus stared at the polished wood of the coffin with a look of practiced sorrow. But they held each other, not for comfort, but like business partners who had just closed a major deal. I saw the impatience in the way Tiffany checked her watch, and the way Marcus's eyes scanned the room, counting the faces, assessing the situation. They were not mourning a loss. They were calculating their gain. Then through the low hum of the organ music I heard it, a whisper that cut through the air and found my ears with perfect clarity. It was Marcus, leaning into Tiffany's ear, so quiet that only a father who knew his son's voice better than his own could hear it. 6 simple words that confirmed every fear Eleanor ever had. It is finally over. Now everything will be ours. The words did not shock me. In a strange, cold way, they were a relief. They burned away the fog of my grief and left me with a single sharp purpose. Eleanor had seen this coming. She knew the darkness in our son's heart, a darkness fueled by Tiffany's endless greed. The secret house, the hidden bank account, the instructions in her letter. It all made sense now. This was not the end. This was the ceremony marking the start of a war. They thought they were at a funeral for their mother, but they were really at the funeral for their inheritance. And I, Samuel Jones, would make sure of that. The week after the funeral passed in a thick, suffocating silence. The house, which once echoed with Eleanor's laughter and the scent of her baking, now felt like a hollow tomb. Every creaking floorboard, every ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall was a painful reminder of her absence. I tried to maintain a routine, making coffee at sunrise and reading the paper, but the rituals felt meaningless without her there to share them. I was adrift in a sea of memories, and the silence was my only companion. That silence was shattered on a gray Saturday morning by the sharp, demanding ring of the doorbell. It was Marcus and Tiffany. They did not wait for me to invite them in. They pushed past me into the foyer, Tiffany's eyes already scanning the living room with a critical gaze, as if she were inspecting a property, not visiting her grieving father-in-law. Marcus could not meet my eyes. He busied himself with taking off a jacket he barely wore, his movements stiff and awkward. They sat on the sofa opposite my armchair, the one Eleanor always called my throne. Tiffany sat upright, a portfolio in her lap, while Marcus slumped beside her, a puppet waiting for his strings to be pulled. Tiffany cleared her throat, her voice filled with a fake sympathy that was sharper than any insult. "Dad," she began, "we have been so worried about you all alone in this huge house." She opened the portfolio. "We have been thinking, and it's just not practical. The upkeep, the property taxes, all these empty rooms collecting dust. It is a burden you should not have to bear at your age." She slid a business card across the coffee table. "So I took the liberty of contacting a real estate agent, the best in the city. She thinks we can get a fantastic price for this place. Someone is coming to see it this weekend." Her words hung in the air, cold and final. Marcus finally looked at me, his expression pleading. "It is for the best, Dad. We will find you a nice smaller apartment, something more manageable." He said the words like he had rehearsed them in the car on the way over. I looked at them. I looked at my son, a man I no longer recognized, and his wife, a woman whose ambition was a bottomless pit. I felt the anger rising inside me, a hot wave of fury, but I pushed it down deep down until my voice was as calm and still as a frozen lake. I let the silence stretch for a long, uncomfortable moment, watching them squirm. Then I gave a single slow nod. "I understand." They both visibly relaxed, a wave of relief washing over them. They thought they had won. They could not see the storm raging behind my eyes. They could not hear the thoughts in my head. Go ahead, I thought. Play your hand. Show me just how greedy you can be. Because Eleanor and I have been waiting for this game to start for 3 years, and I am holding all the aces. They did not give me a warning. 3 days after their announcement, a large, grimy moving truck rumbled down our quiet street and backed into my driveway with a deafening screech of its brakes. I was on the back porch trying to find some peace in the morning air, but the sound was a declaration of war. I stood up, my coffee growing cold in my hands, and watched as the invasion began. Marcus was there directing the movers with awkward gestures, but Tiffany was the field marshal. She stood on the lawn with her arms crossed, pointing and issuing sharp commands, her voice cutting through the morning calm. Their belongings were a stark contrast to the life Eleanor and I had built. Where we had warm oak and soft fabrics, they had cold chrome, black leather, and gray sterile plastics. It was the furniture of a magazine, not a home. The movers were careless, their boots tracking mud across the welcome mat Eleanor had picked out. They treated our home like a loading dock. Boxes labeled with Tiffany's neat, aggressive handwriting were stacked everywhere. A tower of them marked kitchen was placed directly on top of Eleanor's antique cherry wood dining table, the table where we had hosted decades of Thanksgiving dinners, where we celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. I heard a scraping sound and knew with a sickening certainty that its polished surface was now permanently scarred. I saw them toss a heavy box of books onto the delicate quilt that covered the guest bed, the room I was now meant to call my own. Each thud of a box felt like a blow to my chest. My silence was a dam holding back a flood of rage. I watched as they invaded every corner of our shared history. Tiffany directed a mover to place a sleek, modern television stand where Eleanor's treasured piano had once stood. The piano was now pushed against a far wall, covered in a dusty sheet, silenced and forgotten. I clenched my fists in my pockets, my knuckles white. I thought of all the nights Eleanor would play her fingers dancing across the keys, filling the house with music that was both joyful and sad. Now the only sound was the screech of packing tape and the hollow echo of strangers' footsteps on our wooden floors. They were not just moving in their furniture, they were burying my life under the weight of theirs. The true assault began once the boxes were inside. Tiffany walked through the living room with a look of open disgust on her face. Her first target was the mantelpiece above the fireplace. It had always been our family's sacred space, lined with silver-framed photographs that chronicled our lives. There was a picture of Eleanor and me on our wedding day, young and full of foolish, beautiful hope. There was Marcus as a boy missing his 2 front teeth, holding up a fishing trophy. There was a photo from our 50th anniversary, our faces wrinkled, but our eyes still full of love. With a swift, uncaring sweep of her arm, Tiffany cleared the entire mantelpiece, dumping our whole history into a dusty cardboard box she found in the corner. She did not wrap them. She did not handle them with care. She erased us. In their place, she began to hang her art. One was a large canvas that was just a splash of angry red paint. Another was a series of black lines on a white background. They were cold, meaningless, and soulless. They were insults hanging on my wall. She stood back, her head tilted, and smiled. "Much better," she said to Marcus. "More modern, less cluttered." I looked at the empty spaces where our memories used to be, and I felt a piece of my own soul being ripped out. She was not redecorating. She was performing an exorcism, purging the spirit of my wife from the very walls she had loved. I could not breathe. The air in the house was thick with their presence, with the smell of cardboard and their strange chemical perfumes. I needed to escape, so I slipped out the back door into the garden, Eleanor's sanctuary. I stood by the rose bushes, touching the soft petals, trying to ground myself. That is when I heard a gentle voice. "Samuel, is everything all right over there?" It was Mrs. Peterson, my neighbor Martha, peering over the wooden fence. Her face was a mask of genuine concern. She had been our neighbor for 40 years. She had watched Marcus grow up. I tried to force a smile, but I am sure it looked more like a grimace. "Just some changes, Martha. Marcus and Tiffany are moving in for a while to help me out." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. Martha's eyes were kind, but they saw everything. She looked past me at the chaotic scene visible through the living room window. "Oh, I see," she said, and her tone conveyed a world of understanding. She paused, then added softly, "Eleanor loved this house just the way it was. She told me once that every object had a story. She put her heart into every single corner. Her words were a balm on my raw nerves. They were a confirmation that I was not crazy, that my pain was real. Someone else saw this invasion for what it was. I looked at my kind neighbor, then back at the house that was no longer my home. Her words did not make me sadder. They made me stronger. They solidified my resolve. I was not just a grieving old man. I was a guardian of Eleanor's memory, and I would not let them win. Yes, she did, Martha. I said, my voice finally steady. Yes, she did. The first few days of their occupation were a storm of constant grating noise and change. The house no longer felt like my own. It was a territory under siege, and I was a silent ghost haunting its halls. Tiffany's cold, modern aesthetic had spread like a virus, covering the warm heart of our home with a sterile shell. In the midst of this alien landscape, there was one last sanctuary, one piece of furniture that remained untouched, a bastion of comfort and memory. It was my old leather armchair. It sat by the window in the living room, its surface cracked and worn smooth over 30 years, molded perfectly to the shape of my body. It was more than a chair. It was an anchor to my past, a silent witness to my life with Eleanor. One afternoon, seeking a moment of peace, I brewed a cup of tea just the way Eleanor used to make it, and picked up a book she had loved. I walked into the living room, anticipating the simple comfort of sinking into that familiar embrace. But I stopped dead in the doorway. The sight before me sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Marcus and Tiffany were there, grunting and struggling with the heavy armchair, trying to force it through the living room doorway. They had it tilted at an awkward angle, its wooden feet scraping against the floorboards. They were not just moving a piece of furniture, they were amputating a piece of my soul. For a moment I was too stunned to speak. Then a low, firm voice came out of me, a voice I had not used in years, the voice of a man who would not be moved. Stop. They both froze, startled. They had not expected me to be there. They had not expected me to fight back. That chair stays here. Tiffany was the first to recover. She let go of the chair, letting it thud back onto the floor. She straightened her blouse and pasted on a sickeningly sweet smile. "Dad," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "this old thing is falling apart. It is so worn out and honestly a little dirty. We were just moving it out so we can buy you a brand new recliner. Something ergonomic, much better for your back." Her words were an insult wrapped in the language of care. She was not concerned for my back. She was concerned that my old chair offended her modern sensibilities. I ignored her. I looked at my son. "I do not need a new one, Marcus. Your mother and I watched countless movies from this chair. We read stories to you in this chair when you were a boy. It has been here for 30 years. It is part of this house. It is part of our family." My voice cracked on the last word, a tremor of vulnerability that I immediately regretted. I had shown her a weakness, and like a predator, she pounced. "Dad holding on to old things will not bring her back," Tiffany said, her voice losing its sweetness and gaining a sharp, condescending edge. "It is not healthy to live in the past. We are trying to help you move forward." I looked back at my son, pleading with my eyes for him to understand, to remember, but he just shook his head, unable to meet my gaze. "Do not be so stubborn, Dad," he mumbled, his voice weak. "Just listen to Tiffany. It is only a chair. Only a chair." The words hit me harder than a physical blow. It was not just a chair. It was my last connection to his mother, the last undisputed piece of territory I had in my own home, and he had just dismissed it as nothing. In that moment, I saw with painful clarity that the boy I had raised was gone, replaced by this weak, hollowed-out man who danced to his wife's tune. I knew then that to argue further was pointless. To raise my voice would only feed their narrative of me as a difficult, confused old man. A shouting match was a battle I could not win. So I chose a different kind of resistance. Silence. I straightened my back, my face becoming an emotionless mask. I took a single step back from the doorway, clearing their path. I did not give them my permission, but I gave them my silence, a silence so heavy and full of contempt that it was louder than any scream. They took my silence as surrender. With a final triumphant grunt, they shoved the chair through the door. I heard a sickening rip as the worn leather caught on the doorframe, tearing a fresh wound in its side. They did not even notice. They just kept going, dragging it out the back door and across the yard. That evening, the house was quiet. In the living room, a large, empty space gaped where my chair used to be. It was a void that screamed of my defeat. I could not bear to stay inside. I put on my old jacket and walked out into the chilly night air towards the small, dilapidated storage shed at the back of the property. I pulled open the creaking wooden door. The air inside was cold and damp, smelling of rust soil and decay. And there, in the center of the gloom, sat my armchair. It looked lost, exiled, a king dethroned and cast into a dungeon. I walked over and slowly sat down, the familiar leather cool against my skin. I did not turn on the single bare light bulb. I just sat there in the darkness, surrounded by forgotten tools and sleeping spiders, a lonely man in a lonely chair in a lonely shed. I had fought my first battle, and I had lost. After the defeat of the armchair, I retreated into a state of quiet, vigilant observation. I saw then that my initial assessment was wrong. Tiffany was not just redecorating. She was conducting a systematic campaign of erasure. Her mission was to scrub every trace of Eleanor's existence from the house to demolish the spiritual foundation of our home so she could build her own shallow empire on its ruins. It was a psychological war waged not with shouts, but with the quiet, brutal efficiency of a trained assassin. Every day brought a new subtle attack, a fresh wound to my soul, and I was powerless to stop it. Her first major offensive was against our visual history, the photographs that adorned our walls. The long hallway leading to the bedrooms had been our life's gallery. Dozens of frames held moments captured in time. Vacations to the Grand Canyon, Christmases with a young Marcus surrounded by toys, lazy summer afternoons in the garden. It was the story of our love, our family, written in light and silver. I came home one afternoon from a long, aimless walk and found the hallway wall completely bare. All that remained were the faint outlines of where the frames had hung and small white patches of spackle covering the nail holes like scars on skin. I found Tiffany in the kitchen humming to some pop song on the radio. I kept my voice steady, a feat of incredible self-control. "Tiffany, where are the pictures?" She turned to me without a hint of shame, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Oh, Dad, I packed them all away for you." So carefully, she lied. Honestly, the frames were all different shapes and sizes. It looked so cluttered and dated. I am creating a more cohesive, minimalist look for the house. It will increase the resale value. I did not miss how she mentioned the resale value, a constant refrain in her conquest. I walked into the living room and my heart sank further. The mantelpiece, once a shrine to our family, was now a monument to her victory. She had left a single large photograph in the center. It was a picture of Marcus at his college graduation, beaming in his cap and gown. Eleanor and I were in the photo too, but we were pushed to the very edge of the frame, small, blurry figures. She had not removed Eleanor entirely. She had simply demoted her, relegated her from the vibrant center of our family to an insignificant extra in her own son's life. The next violation was far more personal. It was an intrusion into the most sacred space of my marriage. I needed to retrieve an old tax document from the desk in what used to be our master bedroom. I knocked a courtesy in a home I no longer commanded. When there was no answer, I slowly opened the door. The room was unrecognizable. Our warm floral wallpaper had been painted over in a cold, sterile gray. My side of the closet was empty. But the worst part was the scene at Eleanor's vanity, the beautiful oak piece I had built for her on our 20th anniversary. Tiffany was sitting there surrounded by her expensive jars and bottles, and around her neck, resting against her skin, was Eleanor's pearl necklace, the one my wife had worn on our wedding day. A feral rage, white-hot and pure, surged through me. My voice was a low growl. "Take that off, now!" She jumped, startled, clutching the pearls at her throat. She quickly composed herself, her face shifting into a mask of wounded innocence. "Dad, you scared me. I was just making sure it was still in good condition, polishing it a little. I thought I would keep it safe for a future granddaughter. Yours and Marcus's, of course." The audacity of her words stole my breath. To claim my wife's most treasured possession for a hypothetical child, to speak of a future she was building on the wreckage of my past, was a cruelty beyond measure. I walked forward, my hand outstretched, my expression leaving no room for argument. "Give it to me." Her defiant look crumbled and she slowly unclasped the necklace and dropped it into my trembling hand. I walked out, the pearls feeling cool against my skin, feeling like I had just failed to protect my wife all over again. The final phase of her campaign was the destruction of Eleanor's joys, the things that made her soul sing. I was in the kitchen one evening, a wave of nostalgia washing over me. I had a sudden, desperate craving for Eleanor's famous lemon pound cake, a recipe passed down from her grandmother. I went to the small wooden recipe box she always kept on the counter, but it was gone. "Tiffany," I called out, "have you seen Eleanor's recipe box?" She answered from the living room, her voice bored, her eyes glued to her phone. "Oh, that old thing, I tossed it out last week when I was decluttering the counters. Honestly, Dad, all those recipes were a heart attack on a plate. All that butter and sugar and flour. It is not healthy. I saved you from yourself." She had thrown away a legacy, generations of handwritten love and tradition, and dismissed it as a health hazard. The casual nature of the destruction was the most painful part. Later that night, I went to the bookshelf in the den, hoping to find solace in one of Eleanor's favorite novels, but they were all gone. Jane Austen, Toni Morrison, Zora Neale Hurston, all of them vanished. In their place stood neat, glossy rows of Tiffany's fashion magazines. Vogue, Elle, Harper's Bazaar. The wisdom and soul of literature had been replaced by the shallow, fleeting world of trends and consumerism. I stood there looking at the glossy covers, and I understood her mission completely. She wanted to replace everything of substance with a hollow facade. And in this new hollow house, there was no room for Eleanor, and there was no room for me. In the weeks that followed, the house became an occupied territory where I was a political prisoner. Tiffany's reign was absolute. She controlled the television, the thermostat, and the contents of the refrigerator. I spent less and less time inside, finding the cold gray walls and the soulless art oppressive. My only escape, my last sliver of sovereign land, was the backyard. Specifically, it was Eleanor's rose garden. It was a riot of color and fragrance, a living testament to the woman I loved. She had planted every bush herself, choosing each one with care. There was the deep velvety red of the Mr. Lincoln, the gentle pink of the Queen Elizabeth, and the cheerful yellow of the Graham Thomas. The garden was not just a collection of plants. It was a library of memories, a sanctuary where her spirit still felt vibrantly alive. One sunny afternoon, I was out back performing the quiet ritual of tending to her roses. It was a form of prayer for me. My hands, though old, moved with a gentle precision, pruning away dead leaves and checking for any sign of blight. I found myself speaking to them as I often did when I was alone. I leaned in close to a perfect crimson bloom, its scent rich and sweet. "Eleanor, my love," I whispered, "you are looking especially beautiful today." I was so lost in my quiet conversation that I did not hear my neighbor Martha Peterson approach the fence that separated our yards. "She always said these roses were her children," Martha said softly, her voice warm with nostalgia. I looked up, startled, but her face held only a kind, knowing smile. She had seen me talking to the flowers, and she did not find it strange at all. She understood. "She knew everyone by name, you know," Martha continued. "She would tell me stories about which one she planted for your anniversary and which one she planted when Marcus was born. This garden was her heart, Samuel." A wave of gratitude washed over me. To have someone else remember, to have someone else see this small patch of earth for what it truly was, felt like a lifeline. We stood there for a few moments in comfortable silence, two old friends sharing a memory of the woman we both missed. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated peace. It was the calm before the storm. The next morning, I was in the kitchen rinsing out my coffee cup when a flash of violent movement in the garden caught my eye. I looked out the window and my blood ran cold. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers and shattered on the tile floor, but I barely registered the sound. My entire world had narrowed to the horrific scene unfolding outside. It was Tiffany. She was in the middle of the rose garden wielding a large, brutal pair of hedge shears. But she was not pruning. She was slaughtering. With vicious hacking motions, she was severing the thick woody canes of the rose bushes at their base. Years of growth, decades of love and care were being destroyed in seconds. Petals rained down on the grass like drops of blood. The splintering sound of the old wood being torn apart was the sound of my own heart breaking. A roar of pure primal anguish ripped itself from my throat. I threw open the back door and ran out onto the lawn, my feet stumbling on the uneven ground. "Tiffany, what are you doing? Stop it. Stop it right now." She turned slowly, her face flushed with exertion. There was no shame in her eyes, no remorse. There was only a look of cold, grim satisfaction. She rested the shears on her hip. "I am improving the landscaping, Dad," she said, her voice frustratingly calm. "Do not be so dramatic." I gestured wildly at the carnage around her, at the decapitated bushes and the ruined blooms littering the grass. "Improving. You call this improving? You are destroying it. This was your mother's garden." Marcus's mother. Her expression hardened, and it was a mess. She said, her voice flat and dismissive. "Roses are far too high maintenance. They get diseases, they attract pests, and they look terrible in the winter. I am going to put in some nice, neat evergreen shrubs, something modern and clean. Low-maintenance plants are much better for the property value when we sell the house." The mention of property value of money in the face of this sacred desecration made something snap inside me. My voice broke thick with grief and a rage so profound it felt like it would tear me apart. Property value. I screamed, the sound raw and wounded. This is not about property value. This is Eleanor's soul. Her soul is in this garden. It was my final desperate plea for her to understand, to see the human cost of her actions. Tiffany actually let out a small, contemptuous laugh. She looked me straight in the eye, a slight smirk playing on her lips, and delivered the final fatal blow. "Souls do not pay the bills, Dad." As the cruel words echoed in the air, my eyes darted across the yard. I saw Martha Peterson standing frozen by her fence, a gardening trowel having dropped from her hand onto the grass. Her face was a pale mask of horror, her hand covering her mouth. She had seen it all. She had heard it all. My humiliation was complete. Tiffany turned her back on me then, as if I were nothing more than a buzzing insect, and resumed her work of destruction. I stood there, a broken man in the middle of a massacred garden, the sound of splintering wood and my own shattered heart filling the empty air. Having failed to break my spirit by destroying the physical emblems of my past, Tiffany shifted her strategy. The war for the house moved from a campaign of emotional terrorism to a cold, calculated financial assault. She must have realized that her overt cruelty, especially in the garden, had been a tactical error, something that could be witnessed and judged. So she retreated, adopting a new mask, one of a caring, dutiful daughter-in-law. Her new approach was far more insidious, a quiet attempt to seize control of the last piece of my independence, my finances. Her attack came on the day my monthly pension check arrived. I was sitting at the kitchen table, slitting open the envelope, a routine I had performed for years. Tiffany entered the kitchen, a cup of herbal tea in her hands, and a look of deep concern on her face. "Dad," she said, her voice soft and sweet, "you really should not have to worry about all this paperwork, bills, checks, bank statements. It must be so overwhelming for you now with everything else on your mind." She sat down opposite me, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Why do you not let me help you? I am good with numbers. I can take over managing your accounts, set up automatic payments from your pension, make sure all the bills are paid on time. You just relax. You have worked hard your whole life. You have earned a rest. It was a masterful performance." She sounded so reasonable, so loving. But I saw the predator behind the performance. I saw the glint of avarice in her eyes. This was not an offer of help. It was a hostile takeover. She wanted access to my bank accounts. She wanted control of my only source of income. Eleanor's warnings echoed in my mind, as clear as if she were whispering in my ear. "Never let them touch your money, Samuel. Not a single dime." I carefully folded the check, placed it back in its envelope, and looked Tiffany straight in the eye. My voice was devoid of warmth, as cold and hard as river stone. "No, thank you, Tiffany. I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." The sweet mask she wore flickered. For a split second I saw the real Tiffany, a flash of raw anger and frustration in her eyes before she could hide it. But I had seen it, and she knew I had seen it. My firm refusal had done more than just protect my pension. It had planted a seed of suspicion in her mind. I could almost see the gears turning behind her eyes. Why is he so protective, she was thinking. It is just a small pension, unless there is more. Unless the old man is hiding something. I knew in that moment that I had drawn a line in the sand, but I had also made myself a target. The hunt for my money, the real reason they were in my house, had now officially begun. Her retaliation was swift. Her suspicion acted like fuel on the fire of her greed. She decided she could not wait any longer to get her hands on the value of the house. 2 days later, I was sitting in the uncomfortable modern chair they had bought to replace my beloved armchair, trying to lose myself in a book. The doorbell rang. Before I could even make a move to get up, Tiffany rushed past me, a bright artificial smile plastered on her face. "I will get it," she chirped. She opened the door to a tall woman in a sharp business suit carrying a leather briefcase. The woman had the predatory smile of a shark. "Susan, so glad you could make it," Tiffany said loudly for my benefit. "Please come in." This was Susan, the real estate agent. There had been no phone call, no warning. This was another ambush. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach as I was forced to sit there a prisoner in my own home while they began their inspection. They walked through the rooms, Tiffany pointing and chattering, Marcus trailing behind them like a lost puppy. They spoke about me in the third person, their voices loud and clear as if I were deaf or already dead. "The current occupant will be relocating, of course," Tiffany said brightly to Susan. "So you can imagine this space completely empty." Susan nodded, making notes on a tablet. "Excellent. We will knock down this wall here to create a modern open-concept living space," Tiffany declared, gesturing between the living room and kitchen. "And these old hardwood floors are in terrible shape. They will need to be replaced entirely." They were casually discussing the demolition of my life, the dismemberment of my home right in front of me. I sat there clutching my book, my knuckles white, a silent, invisible witness to my own erasure. After they had inspected every room, they returned to the living room. Susan, the agent, turned to me for the first time. She gave me a wide, condescending smile, the kind of smile one gives to a confused child who does not understand the adult world. Her voice was syrupy and patronizing. "Mr. Jones, it has been a pleasure to see your lovely home. Now do not you worry about a thing." She leaned in closer, lowering her voice slightly as if sharing a secret. "Once Tiffany and Marcus find a buyer, we can help you find a lovely little room in a very nice home. Something with activities and prepared meals, so you will be well taken care of." The final humiliation. A stranger invited into my house by my own son was offering to help put me away in a nursing home. I did not answer her. I did not look at her. I just stared at the blank wall opposite me. But inside my mind, a switch had been flipped. The time for silent observation was over. The time for action had come. This was the final straw. The air in the house grew thick with a tense, expectant silence after the real estate agent left. The final humiliation hung between us, an invisible wall of resentment and betrayal. I did not move from my chair. I simply sat there, a statue carved from grief, while Tiffany and Marcus whispered excitedly in the kitchen. They were celebrating their victory, dividing the spoils of a war they thought they had already won. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me, the kind of calm that comes when you know the worst has happened and the path forward, however difficult, is finally clear. The time for enduring their cruelty was over. The time for enacting Eleanor's final plan had arrived. They approached me that evening as a united front, their strategy clearly rehearsed. They moved with a somber, theatrical gravity, as if they were performing a difficult but necessary duty. Tiffany held a crisp, manila folder in her hands like a sacred text. They did not sit casually. They sat opposite me in the two stiff chairs they had brought into the living room, transforming the space into a cold, informal boardroom where my fate was to be decided. Tiffany placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it with a deliberate slowness. She slid a glossy, colorful brochure out and pushed it towards me. The title, printed in a cheerful, looping font, read, "Tranquil Meadows Retirement Community." I picked it up. The cover showed a group of silver-haired seniors laughing as they played cards on a sunny patio. It was a picture of manufactured joy, a lie printed on glossy paper. I opened it and saw more staged photographs. A woman pretending to paint a ceramic vase. A man smiling blankly as a nurse checked his blood pressure. I looked past the smiles and saw the truth in the details. I saw the drab institutional green of the walls, the harsh glare of the fluorescent lighting, the cheap linoleum floors that curled at the edges. I saw the shared rooms barely big enough for 2 beds and a small nightstand. This was not a community. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. This was the prison they had chosen for me. It looks wonderful, does it not? "Dad," Marcus said, his voice strained. He was trying so hard to sell the lie, to convince me and perhaps himself. "It has 24/7 nursing care, so you will always be safe. And there are activities, clubs, friends your own age to talk to. It is so much better for you than being all alone here." His words were hollow, a script he had been given to read. Tiffany chimed in, her voice firm and decisive, leaving no room for debate. "This is what is best for everyone, Dad. We will be able to rest easy knowing you are being cared for, and you will have the companionship you need." Her use of the word everyone was the final twisting knife. Everyone meant her and Marcus. My needs, my wants, my entire life were irrelevant. Then she slid the second document from the folder. It was a thick stack of papers held together by a binder clip, an official-looking contract. She placed it on top of the brochure, covering the fake smiles with cold, hard text. She uncapped a cheap blue pen and set it beside the contract. "This is just the sales authorization agreement, Dad," she said, her voice dropping to a business-like tone. "It is just a formality. We just need your signature right here at the bottom to allow the agent to list the property and move forward." This was it, the culmination of their entire campaign, the eviction notice disguised as a solution. I looked down at the cheap brochure promising a slow, quiet death, then at the contract that would sign away the home I had built with the woman I loved. I slowly raised my head and looked at their faces. I saw the undisguised feverish greed in Tiffany's eyes. She was practically vibrating with anticipation. Then I looked at my son. I saw the desperate, pathetic weakness in his face, the shame warring with his desire for the money. He would not even look at me. He was staring at the contract as if it held the key to all his problems. In that moment, I felt a lifetime of love for him curdle into a cold, hard pity. They had done their research on the house, on its market value, but they had failed to do their research on me. They had forgotten the man I was, and they had completely, utterly underestimated the woman my Eleanor had been. I thought of my promise to her, of the rainy afternoon we spent in a lawyer's office 3 years ago setting up the ironclad trust. The lawyer's words came back to me clear as a bell. "Without your signature, Samuel, and the signature of your legal counsel, this house cannot be sold by anyone. It is untouchable." A surge of pure, cold adrenaline shot through me. I reached for the pen. I let them see my hand tremble, let them think it was the tremor of a defeated, heartbroken old man. They did not know it was the trembling of a soldier about to spring a perfectly laid trap. I did not even read the document. I knew its contents were irrelevant. I moved the pen to the signature line, the cheap plastic feeling slick in my hand. I scrawled my name, a messy, jagged line that was barely legible. It was a signature of pure contempt. I capped the pen and pushed the folder back across the table towards them. I did not say a word. I simply leaned back in my chair and watched. A shared look of triumph passed between them. Tiffany's smile was wide and predatory. Marcus finally let out a long breath, a sigh of profound relief. They had their signature. They thought they had won. They were completely, blissfully unaware that they had just sealed their own fate. That night, for the first time in months, I did not sleep in the cramped guest room they had assigned me. I did not sleep at all. I sat in the darkness of the living room, a silent sentinel in a house that was no longer mine, and I waited. I listened to the sounds of them sleeping, the soft snores of my son, the occasional sigh from Tiffany. They were sleeping the deep, untroubled sleep of the victorious dreaming of money and new furniture, completely unaware of the revolution that was about to begin. My alarm was set not with a sound, but with the first faint graying of the sky in the east. At 4 a.m, when the night was at its darkest and coldest, I rose. Every movement was deliberate, silent, practiced in my mind 100 times. I dressed in the simple, sturdy clothes I had laid out the night before. I did not bother with a final look around the house. There was nothing left there for me to see, only the ghosts of what had been and the ugly monuments of what it had become. My escape was contained in a single small suitcase that I had packed weeks ago and hidden in the back of my closet. It was not heavy. I had learned that the things that truly matter in a life have no weight at all. Inside were 3 sets of clothes, my shaving kit, and the few treasures I had managed to salvage. There was our wedding photograph, the one Tiffany had thrown in a box, which I had rescued and kept hidden under my mattress. There was Eleanor's pearl necklace safe in a soft cloth pouch. And there were 3 of her favorite books, their spines worn, their pages filled with her notes in the margins. It was a suitcase full of love and survival. I slipped out the back door, the same door I had burst through to defend her rose garden. The latch clicked shut behind me with a soft finality. I did not look back. The air was bitingly cold, and I could see my breath pluming in the pre-dawn gloom. The streets were deserted, silent, except for the whisper of the wind and the soft crunch of my own footsteps on the pavement. I walked the 2 miles to the downtown bus station, each step feeling lighter than the last. With every block I put between myself and that house, I felt a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. It was the weight of their greed, their disrespect, their constant suffocating presence. I was a man walking out of his own prison. The bus station was a lonely, fluorescent-lit place. I bought a one-way ticket to a small town called Havenwood, a place 2 hours away, a place where no one knew my name. I sat on a hard plastic bench and waited for the bus, the small suitcase resting at my feet. The journey itself was a blur of passing landscapes seen through a dirty window. I watched the familiar skyline of my city recede, the tall buildings shrinking until they were nothing but jagged teeth on the horizon. I watched the suburbs give way to farmland, the houses replaced by barns and silos. It was as if I was traveling backwards in time, leaving the complicated, painful present for a simpler past. I did not feel sad. I felt a profound, exhilarating sense of release. I was Samuel Jones again, not just Dad, not just an inconvenient old man. I was a man on a journey to a new life. The bus pulled into Havenwood just as the sun was beginning to properly warm the day. The town was quiet, charming, a place that time seemed to have forgotten. I got off the bus, took a deep breath of the clean country air, and started walking. I did not need a map. Eleanor and I had visited this place only once 3 years ago, but the route was etched into my memory. I walked down Main Street, past a small bakery and a hardware store, and turned onto a quiet residential street shaded by a canopy of enormous oak trees. And then I saw it. At the end of the street, set back from the road, was a small, lovely house painted a cheerful shade of sky blue with a wide, welcoming front porch. Our secret. My hand trembled slightly as I pulled the key from my pocket, the same key I had carried every single day for 3 years. The lock turned with a satisfying click. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was still and cool, carrying the faint, dusty scent of a place that has been closed up for a long time. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but it was neat, tidy, and exactly as we had left it. It was a time capsule of our love, a sanctuary they could never touch. And there, sitting in the very center of the small kitchen table, was a single white envelope. My name was written on the front in Eleanor's beautiful, familiar handwriting. My heart ached. I sat down at the table, my fingers fumbling as I opened it. Inside was a letter several pages long. I began to read, and as I did, her voice filled the silent house, strong and clear and full of love. She told me how proud she was of me. She told me about the secret bank account, the one that held our life savings safe from Marcus's reach. But it was the final paragraph that shattered the last of my grief and replaced it with a powerful, burning resolve. "Live, my Samuel," she had written. "Do not let them win. Do not let them turn you into a bitter, broken man. That is not who you are. Go fishing at the lake like you always wanted. Read all the books we never had time for on that sunny front porch. And in the backyard plant a new rose garden, one that is just for you. Do not let them take one more second of your peace. Your freedom is our victory." I folded the letter, tears finally streaming down my face. They were not tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of love, and of a promise being kept. My new life had begun. The first few days in Havenwood were like waking from a long and terrible nightmare. I woke with the sun, not with an alarm clock, and the first thing I heard was not the sound of traffic, but the cheerful, complicated songs of birds outside my window. The light that streamed into the small blue house felt different, cleaner somehow, as if the air itself was new. I would make a pot of strong black coffee and sit on the front porch, a place that was entirely my own. I would read one of Eleanor's old books, feeling the familiar weight of it in my hands, and watch the slow, quiet life of the town unfold before me. People would walk by with their dogs and wave. A real, genuine wave, not the hurried nod of strangers in the city. After a few days, a woman from across the street brought over a freshly baked apple pie, simply as a welcome to the neighborhood. We spoke for a few minutes about the weather and her garden. It was a simple human connection, something I had been starved of for months. For the first time since Eleanor's passing, I felt myself begin to breathe again. I had not realized how shallow and tight my breathing had become, how my shoulders were permanently tensed, braced for the next insult, the next act of erasure. Here in this quiet town, in this small blue house, the weight on my chest began to dissolve. I took long walks down streets lined with ancient oak trees. I rediscovered the simple joy of cooking for myself, of making exactly what I wanted to eat when I wanted to eat it. I spent an entire afternoon just sitting in the backyard, feeling the warm sun on my face, planning where I would plant my new rose garden. This was the life Eleanor had saved for me. It was not a life of riches or grand adventures. It was a life of peace, a life of dignity. It was a life that was finally mine. The intrusion came on the 5th day. I had kept my old cell phone, the one with the number they knew, mostly out of a deeply buried, foolish sense of obligation. I had turned it on and left it in a kitchen drawer, a single tenuous link to the world I had escaped. I was washing my lunch dishes when it began to ring, its shrill electronic sound a violent trespass on the tranquility of the house. My heart hammered in my chest. I knew who it was. I dried my hands slowly, my mind racing. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it ring until it gave up, but another part knew that this was a battle that had to be fought, a final ghost that had to be exorcised. I walked to the drawer, took a deep, steadying breath, and answered the call. I did not even have time to say hello. Marcus's voice exploded from the speaker, a torrent of panicked, furious accusations. There was no greeting, no concern for my well-being, only rage. "Dad, where are you?" "What did you do?" he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "The lawyer just called. He said the sale was blocked by some irrevocable trust." "An irrevocable trust, Dad? He said your signature is worthless without his. You hid this from us. You lied to us. How could you do this? After everything we did for you, moving in to take care of you. Tiffany is a wreck. Our plans, our entire future. It is all ruined because of some secret you kept from your own son." He kept going, a long, rambling tirade of self-pity and blame. He talked about the deposits they had put down on a new condo, the furniture they had ordered, the humiliation they now faced. He never once asked if I was okay. He never once showed a shred of remorse for how he had treated me. I listened to it all, my eyes closed. I held the phone slightly away from my ear, and the sound of my son's voice, a voice I had once loved more than anything in the world, became nothing more than the meaningless noise of a stranger having a tantrum. In his words, I heard the final, undeniable truth. I had not lost a son. I had lost the illusion of a son, and I had lost it a long, long time ago. What I felt in that moment was not anger or sadness. It was a profound, liberating indifference. He finally ran out of steam, his tirade ending in a series of ragged, desperate breaths. A heavy silence filled the line. He was waiting for me to argue, to explain, to defend myself. He was waiting for me to engage in the old toxic dance we had been doing for years. I did none of those things. In the quiet of my new kitchen, with the afternoon sun warming my face, I opened my eyes. I spoke a single word into the phone. My voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was calm, steady, and as final as a locked door. No, I did not wait to hear his reply. I ended the call. Then, with methodical precision, I opened my phone's contact list. I found the entry for Marcus. I pressed the option to block his number. I did the same for Tiffany. Then I turned the power off. The small screen went dark. I opened the junk drawer in the kitchen, a drawer filled with old keys, rubber bands, and other forgotten things. I placed the cell phone in the very back of the drawer underneath a roll of twine. I closed it, the sound a soft, satisfying thud. I had severed the last link. The ghost was gone, and I was finally completely and utterly free. 3 days passed. 3 days of profound, uninterrupted peace. I had started to clean the little blue house, wiping away the layers of dust to reveal the warm, beautiful home that lay beneath. I bought groceries, simple things like eggs and bread and good coffee. I even found a small local nursery and bought my first new plant, a young, vibrant rose bush. Life was beginning again. I was sitting on my front porch watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet street when a familiar car turned the corner and pulled to a stop in front of my house. My heart did not leap with fear. It settled into a state of calm resolve. It was time for the final act. Marcus and Tiffany got out of the car. They looked nothing like the confident, commanding figures who had taken over my old home. They looked diminished, defeated. Tiffany's expensive clothes were rumpled, her makeup was smudged, and her face was pale and drawn. Marcus looked like a hollowed-out version of himself, his shoulders slumped, his eyes haunted and full of a desperate shame. They walked up the path to my porch not as conquerors, but as beggars. I did not move from my chair. I simply waited. When they reached the bottom step, I stood up and walked to the doorway blocking the entrance. I would not let them set foot in this sacred place. Tiffany was the first to speak, her voice thick with what I am sure she thought sounded like remorse. She tried to produce tears, but her eyes remained dry. "Dad," she began, her voice a pathetic whimper. "We are so sorry. We made a terrible, terrible mistake. We were wrong." Marcus looked at the ground, unable to meet my eyes. "We did not know, Dad." He stammered, the words tumbling out of him. "We were just so stressed about money, about the future. We messed up. We messed up badly. Please, we need your help. We need you to forgive us." Their apologies were a shallow performance. They were not sorry for the pain they had caused me. They were sorry they had been caught. They were sorry their plan had failed. They were sorry for themselves. I listened to their entire pathetic plea in complete silence. When they finally fell quiet, their empty words hanging in the air between us, I began to speak. My voice was not loud. It was not filled with rage. It was a quiet, cold, and heavy as a tombstone. "You are not sorry for what you did," I said. "You are sorry you got caught." I looked at Tiffany. "You came into my home, the home I built with my wife, and you treated it like a property to be flipped. You called my memories clutter. You wore my wife's pearls, a gift from me on our wedding day, as if they were a trinket you had bought at a store. You stood in her garden, a place she poured 40 years of her soul into, and you butchered it like an invading army. And when I told you it was her soul, you looked me in the eye and told me that souls do not pay the bills. Then I turned my gaze to my son. And you," I said, my voice dropping even lower, "you are my son, her son. And you stood by and watched her do it all. You watched her erase your mother. You held the door for her while she threw out my chair, the chair where I read you bedtime stories. You chose her greed over your own father's grief. You let her do it all. You are not a victim in this, Marcus. You are a willing accomplice." They stood there, stunned into silence by the cold, hard truth of my words. There was nothing they could say, because everything I said was true. Then I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out Eleanor's letter. It was worn and soft, now creased from being read so many times. I held it up. "You think you are clever," I said. "You think you outsmarted a sad, lonely old man. But you did not just underestimate me. You underestimated your mother. Eleanor saw you. She saw both of you for exactly what you are years ago. She did not leave me with a burden. She left me with a lifeboat." I unfolded the letter, my hands steady, and I read her final words aloud, my voice clear and strong, a final testament to the woman they could never defeat. "Live, my Samuel," I read. "Do not let them win. Do not let them turn you into a bitter, broken man. That is not who you are. Go fishing at the lake like you always wanted. Read all the books we never had time for on that sunny front porch. And in the backyard plant a new rose garden, one that is just for you. Do not let them take one more second of your peace. Your freedom is our victory." I looked up from the letter, my eyes meeting theirs one last time. "My wife left me with freedom, peace, and dignity. And for you," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "she left you with nothing but the truth of your own character. That is your inheritance. That is your sentence." I folded the letter and put it back in my pocket close to my heart. This house, this money, this life, it is all mine. It is my inheritance from a wife who loved me. You have no part in it. Now leave, and never show your faces to me again." I did not wait for them to respond. I stepped back inside and closed the door, the sound a gentle final click. I did not slam it. A victory this complete did not require noise. I walked to the back of the house and looked out the window. After a few moments, I saw them turn and walk back to their car. Two defeated figures slinking away from a battle they had lost before it even began. I watched until their car disappeared around the corner. Then I went out into my new backyard where the sun was warm and the air was sweet. I knelt down in the soft earth, dug a small hole with my own hands, and began to plant my new rose bush. True strength isn't about enduring disrespect, but about quietly planning your own liberation. Dignity is a home you build for yourself, secured by boundaries no one can breach. In the end, the quietest plans often lead to the most profound peace, proving self-worth is the only inheritance that truly matters.